Okay, here we are on chapter 14, which covers the period between the Renaissance and the modern age, and it's basically Restoration era through Romanticism. So let's get going. We have the English Restoration in 1660, and basically what happened was Charles the First was beheaded by the Puritans, and Oliver Cromwell took over in England. And then Charles II went into hiding in France and was invited back after Cromwell died. So from 1660 on, you had the return of theater because Charles II enjoyed theater. And so it was a lively period of time. It was the first time in England that women were on stage. We got out of the Shakespeare's Globe with the we were converting to the proscenium stage, which started to become the standard at this point. And both the stage and the audience were raked. So that means that the stages were slightly raked and the audience was raked that way. So you could have good viewing. And the predominant type of play at that period was this comedy of manners. And we looked at that when we looked at the genres. And basically, all these people were rich. The theater goers were the aristocrats. So the plays were about the aristocrats and their foibles. And again, the aristocrats, nobody worked. They were all aristocrats. They were living on borrowed money or inherited money. And so it poked a lot of fun at them. All the characters were kind of, sleazy and lots of sexual intrigue. And they named the characters as their personalities, like Lady Wishforit. Lady Wishforit is Lady Wishfort. And Jack Horner was someone who would to be cuckolded, which is basically when someone sleeps with your wife. The cuckold is someone who horns the person, so Jack Horner. So things like the names kind of were the characters. So it was fun comedy, and there are still restoration comedies being done nowadays. And from earlier clip, we saw a clip of a film version, so they're still being done. They're really kind of popular. Then we go into the 1700s, which really is, again, where the middle class comes to the fore. Now England is growing with the trade and starting an expansion of the middle class. And so the drama changes. It becomes more about the drama of the middle class, and it's a little more sentimental and a little less bawdy. And also and actors were getting status. Now, before then, actors were really kind of looked at, are they really, they were kind of classless, but really sort of associated with, level of prostitutes or, bums. But now you're starting to get actors getting more money. They're getting more prominent. Just like nowadays, actors are like, they're like, rock stars and kings and queens. They're really the top of the heap. So you're starting that. And then we have a mix of forms here with the ballad opera, which is basically you're mixing. This goes from the French drame. So the ballad opera is basically a story. It's a musical, but you're using songs of the period. You're using typical songs that were written just as songs, and you're throwing them in. If you've seen, like, for instance, the Moulin Rouge with Baz Luhrmann uses like Lady Marmalade and things like that in there. So it's that kind of, using popular songs in a story, not just making it up for it. And the French were starting to react against the strictures of this tight neoclassical structure, and they're introducing on their boulevard entertainments, not necessarily in the big academic municipal theaters, but mixing music and drama together. And you get melody, which is melody, and drama, which is drama, and you get melodrame or melodrama, which later becomes the big predominant form in the 1800s and on. Also in Germany, you have the Sturm und Drang, which is storm and stress. But really, these are all just fancy names for plays that are much more open. They have a sprawling storyline. They're passionate. They don't rely on the strict neoclassical structure of time and place, like from the Greeks and Romans, like Shakespeare. Shakespeare basically broke all the rules. He did, he put comedy and drama together. They were doing the same thing in these different countries. And again, you can see the growth of the theaters. Theaters are now these huge edifices, a lot more similar to what you'd see on Broadway today. Um, the Bibienas were a scene design family. They were important. They've got multiple perspectives here. So you've got a perspective point here, and you got a perspective point there. So all these kind of amazing things were being done in art. You have cutouts for scenery now. You've got rolled backdrops that are drop down and are painted. So you're really getting a lot more of the kind of art that is in a modern theater. So lots of expansion and growth there. And then we go on to the 1800s. And particularly in America, 1800s, that century was really theater was king, or theater was queen. Theater was on top because there was no movie, there was no radio, there was no television. It was all about theater. So you also had the expansion of the country with railway and the increasing modernization. So you have towns all over the country and people want to do theater, but there's also popular entertainment too. The minstrel shows, the burlesque variety shows, the Wild West shows, they're very popular. The circuses, you could travel on a train now and take a circus around the country. So it was a really wide open, wild time in the 1800s. In fact, it was so passionate, you had things like theater riots. And, I ask you, when was the last time you ever rioted when you saw a show? That would maybe at a rock concert, you might, be rioting, maybe. So that you really is a level of passion that you just don't see nowadays. In Paris, the French were rioting because of the changing dramatic form. All the theater critics were writing about these new popular plays that were passionate and romantic and adventurous, but got outside the stricture of this, strict classical form. And they're basically, no, stop the play. It doesn't conform to the, but it was very entertaining. The audiences loved it. So they were out of step with the times. And then you have these Astor Place riots over here in New York City. And this was because there were two competing actors, one American actor and one English actor. And there was a lot of friction between who's the better actor. Then they were both touring. They were both touring in America and Britain. And the supporters of the American actor were very passionate about, and they were actually performing on the same street in Astor Place in New York City. And so the fans tried to block this the English performer from performing, and it was a riot. Can you imagine that? I mean, maybe if you were at a concert, you might have your fans. You might think, one popular singer was better than, like, maybe Beyonce is better than Lady Gaga, or vice versa. Or whoever. But that level of passion, you just don't see that as much nowadays. Even though the 1800s were not considered, a sterling period for, a golden age of theater, there was changing dramatic forms, transitional forms. Romanticism, again, breaks through. People reacting against, again, the creative artist doesn't want to be tied down. They want to make their own rules. When people make rules, they're not the ones making plays, because a playwright creates things out of their mind, and they don't care about, does it have to conform to this or that. So Romanticism was a rejection of these typical rules, and they wanted moody plays, atmospheric plays. Typically, you've got the underdog hero, the damaged the damaged hero, which you see, look at any kind of the cop show, you get these damaged characters, but they're more interesting, mood and atmosphere over plot and characters, so it's not highly plotted. And then, of course, you got melodrama, which again is like pretty much almost any popular movie nowadays. You've got action, you've got music, you've got clear cut. Who's the hero? Who's the villain? We know who they are. There's big fight scenes, big action scenes, lots of spectacle, and it always ends with a big, big bang up, and then the hero and the heroine, are successful. This also is part of a well-made play, and there was such a thing called the well-made play, and it was kind of done by theater critics who were kind of scoffed at. It was like, oh, you wrote that by the book. But actually, a well-made play is not a bad play. Like I've got on my notes here, the construction is very careful. It's they lay it out, and it's good to have nice tight construction. Usually, the actor has a secret. Now, think of a play like Oedipus. Oedipus had a secret, or Oedipus didn't know something at the beginning, but the audience did. The action is foreshadowed. Well, in Oedipus, you have Tiresias coming and telling, the blind seer comes and tells Oedipus that he's at the root of this evil plague that plagues the city. And then there's an obligatory. And then after the obligatory scene, you have this tidy close at the end, where everything's wrapped up. And in Oedipus's case, once he finds out that he's the killer, the one who killed the king and caused all this trouble, he blinds himself, and that's the climax at the end. He staggers off to his own fate, and the town is rescued from the plague. So there we go. Also during this period, we have star performers. We have Edwin Booth, an American, who was a very, very famous stage actor of the time, really a big star. Unfortunately, known mostly as the brother of John Wilkes Booth, who killed Lincoln, but he was really very famous in that period. Then we have Eleonora Duse, an Italian performer, and she was very internal. It was said that people paid to watch her think on stage, because she is this very kind of very modern actor, because that's really what the modern acting is about. And Sarah Bernhardt was the opposite. She was a very flamboyant, big, actor, kind of like Bette Midler, Lady Gaga, big, flashy performer, and people loved that too. So there was a lot of work for actors in this era. You had long runs of plays. People were getting, staying in one place more and more. So it was very, very fertile time period. And this was also the era with the modern director. Again, as we covered in directing, Duke of Saxe-Meiningen basically was the one who started, really paying attention with lengthy rehearsals and historical costuming, and trying to be, really particular about, framing the play. And so this was an exciting period there. Richard Wagner, who was an opera composer, but he was also a director, because he oversaw L parts of his productions of his operas. He wanted this Gesamtkunstwerk, which is a total work. So he didn't want to hear the orchestra tuning up before the opera. He wanted the lights down. He wanted the focus on the show. No curtain calls during the opera. He wanted to do it like a play. So that's the kind of thing that the director wants. They control the total production. So Wagner comes in really also as an example of a total director. And then you have some scenic changes. Notice these are like roll drops here, but you start really get more of a fly space. This is rudimentary and early, using all this rigging in the theater to set it up in this fly loft. Again, this was a period of gaslight, which really was somewhat short-lived, because an open flame in a theater is really a bad thing. So a lot of theaters did suffer fire damage from that. And until electricity came in 1879, which coincidentally is about the start of the modern era. You also had the beginning of this box set, which is, instead of just having drops and playing in front of a drop, you actually have a 3-wall set This basically has the two side walls and the back wall, so it's a built-in room. And this is the first time we're seeing this kind of set here. So we have some scenic changes. So all of this is set up for the modern era now. We've transitioned from the Shakespearean time with this open stage and big prosceniums, and now we have women on stage, and we have melodrama and mixes of all kinds of things going on in a play, really opening it up. So we're really setting the stage for the modern era, which comes next. And that will be our next talk. We'll see you then.